Ever notice how some countries, when a dictator falls, they like transition without a hitch, and others, it's complete chaos.
Yeah.
It's such a high stakes thing, and today we're really diving deep into this UN University report that tries to unpack it all.
Yep.
It's called When Dictators Fall: Preventing Violent Conflict During Transitions from Authoritarian Rule.
Catchy.
Yeah, we'll unpack it, don't worry.
Yeah.
Basically, they analyzed like 30 years of global transitions, trying to figure out what leads to violence or not when these regimes collapse.
Right.
And right off the bat, they hit you with this term, entrenched authoritarianism.
Okay.
And I'll be honest, I thought it just meant rigged elections, but it goes
yeah.
way deeper. The report, it paints this picture, right? Imagine a country, one person controls all the oil money, their buddies run the courts, the media, totally in their pocket. Dissent, forget about it.
Wow.
That's entrenched authoritarianism. They're woven into the very fabric of the country.
Yeah, it's like, how do you even begin to untangle that?
Exactly, it's a tangled up mess.
And here's what's interesting. They found that even in those countries, right?
Yeah.
Terrible governance, corruption, human rights abuses, the whole 9 yards. Violence isn't a given.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive, right?
You'd think people would be, like, dying for a revolution.
Exactly. But think about Qatar, back in 95.
Okay.
Emir Khalifa, he gets ousted after 23 years by his own son, practically bloodless. And this was not a loosey-goosey regime. It really shows how violence isn't the automatic outcome, even when you think it would be.
So it's not just like how bad things get, what makes some dictatorships more vulnerable to, a messier collapse.
Right.
The report goes into these different types of entrenched regimes.
Okay.
And it's wild. They each have their own, their own way of holding on to power.
Yeah.
It's like a dictator's playbook.
Exactly. So the report, it breaks these regimes down into these categories, right? You've got your military regimes.
Okay, the tanks, the junta.
Exactly. Then you've got your personalized regimes. Imagine a country where the leader IS the country.
Wow.
They control everything, the money, the military, even their picture is everywhere.
Oh, I've seen those.
Yeah, and they really cultivate this cult of personality, rewarding loyalty above all else. Then, of course, you have your single party states where one party controls everything.
Right, like North Korea.
Exactly. And they might have other parties, technically, but come election time, forget it. They maintain power by, really controlling information, suppressing any kind of opposition.
It's interesting, though, because the report argues that dictators, they actually love institutions.
Yeah.
Which sounds crazy, I know, right?
Right.
But they don't love them like we think, right?
No, they don't.
It's more like they use them as tools to maintain their grip.
Exactly. You might see a parliament or a court system, but it's all a facade, just puppets,
Wow. And then another point they make, it's like economic performance, it matters more than actual corruption levels in some of these places.
It's true.
Which is kind of wild to think about.
Well, think about it. If a dictator can keep the money flowing, even if it's through shady deals, people might be more willing to overlook a lot.
Right. I guess as long as they're doing all right.
The report actually uses Alberto Fujimori in Peru as an example. He was super corrupt, everyone knew it, but he kept the economy humming along. So people were willing to look the other way, at least for a while. It's like that old saying, you can be corrupt, but be competent.
Right, right. Not that we're endorsing that or anything.
Of course not.
But that's when the report gets really, really real. They get into these specific case studies to show how this stuff plays out, like Yemen.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about a cautionary tale, huh?
Yeah.
Apparently, they had all these underlying tensions, simmering beneath the surface, regional conflicts, social unrest, you name it.
Right, and they were all held in check by this very, very fragile power-sharing agreement between the president, the army, and this, powerful tribal leader.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then the Arab Spring happened, that agreement crumbled, and it was like, boom, Pandora's box.
Whoa.
All that pent-up anger, the frustration, it just exploded, and the country was plunged into chaos.
And it makes you think about those ripple effects. One dictator falls, and suddenly you've got a failed state, a breeding ground for extremism.
Absolutely. It's a humanitarian nightmare. And unfortunately, the report highlights this trend that's making these transitions even riskier, the rise of popular uprisings.
So these popular uprisings, they're more dangerous than, the old school coups? Is that what you're saying?
Well, historically, coups were more common, for these regimes to end. But the world has changed. Coups. They're condemned internationally. They don't really work like they used to.
Makes sense.
Instead, you see people taking to the streets, demanding change, fueled by technology, this desire for democracy.
Yeah, you see that everywhere.
But that's where the danger is. These uprisings, often met with brutal crackdowns.
Yeah.
Think about the Arab Spring. So much hope for democracy, right?
Right.
But in many countries, it was met with violence. Those in power, they just clamp down even harder.
Wow.
The stakes are just higher for everyone involved.
So much higher.
In the report, it gets into some of the factors, right? What contributes to a peaceful transition, or, not so peaceful, after a dictator falls?
Yeah.
Like, what happens to the dictator themselves?
Okay, yeah.
Are they prosecuted, exiled to some luxury villa, allowed to just retire peacefully? That can have a huge impact on how things shake out.
Yeah, I bet.
And then there's the whole economic structure of the country, right? Is it all about oil? Because that can really concentrate power, make it harder to build those democratic institutions.
Right.
Or is it more diversified, which, could create a better foundation for stability, a smoother transition.
It's fascinating. Really makes you think twice about, the power of a news cycle. Power movements, they can spread like wildfire online.
Totally.
But the report reminds us it's rarely a clean break from the old ways.
Yeah.
So, okay, if dictators are facing all these new challenges and the UN, their whole thing is preventing violence,
Right.
what can they actually do besides, being concerned?
Million-dollar question, right?
Right.
And the report, it's honest about the limitations. The UN's usual toolkit, sanctions, aid conditions.
Right.
It doesn't always work with these regimes. It's like trying to reason with someone who's wearing noise-canceling headphones,
Totally.
They've tuned it all out, they're isolated, they've got their inner circle, their cronies.
Right.
Sanctions might even backfire, give them an excuse to just tighten their grip even more.
Oh, wow.
But it doesn't mean the UN is powerless. The report actually suggests that quiet diplomacy, working behind the scenes,
Okay.
that might be more effective. Building relationships, finding those pressure points within those inner circles.
So less megaphone diplomacy, more whispers in the corridors of power.
Exactly.
Are there examples of that working?
Yeah, they highlight the UN's role in Angola's transition. Not perfect by any means, but they provided support for that transfer of power, helped push through some important reforms.
Interesting.
It's about playing the long game,
Yeah.
Understanding each situation, all those complexities. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, but being aware of the dynamics, that's crucial.
It's absolute.
Oh, and one last thing. The report talks about this thing they call reversion syndrome.
Reversion syndrome sounds ominous.
Yeah, basically it means that even after a dictator falls, even if there's what looks like a successful transition, there's still a real risk of that country slipping back into authoritarianism.
Wow, so it's like, what, a rubber band? Snapping back after being stretched too far?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that the fight for, democracy, for a more just and equitable world, it requires constant vigilance. It's never really over.
Wow. Okay, listeners, we've gone from dictators' playbooks to the UN working behind the scenes to this whole reversion syndrome.
A lot to unpack. Right?
It's a lot. But what's clear is this. The path from dictatorship to democracy, rarely smooth. And understanding those nuances, crucial for anyone who wants to make a difference in the world. So stay informed, everyone. Pay attention to what's happening globally and keep asking those tough questions.